The place where the birds collected was not far away, by a small stream flowing through an aspen grove. Levin got out and took Oblonsky to a nook in a mossy, somewhat marshy meadow, where the snow had already melted. He himself went to the opposite side, near a double birch, rested his gun on the fork of a dead branch, took off his kaftan, clasped a belt about his waist, and ensured the free motion of his arms. Old grey Laska, following him step by step, sat down cautiously in front of him, and pricked up her ears. The sun was setting behind the great forest, and against the bright sky the young birches and aspens stood out distinctly, with their bending branches and their swelling buds. In the forest, where the snow still lay, the low rippling sound of waters could be heard running in their narrow channels. Little birds were chirping and flying from tree to tree. In the intervals of perfect silence one could hear the rustling of the last year's leaves, moved by the thawing earth or the pushing herbs. "Why, one can really hear and see the grass grow," said Levin to himself, as he saw a moist and slate-colored aspen leaf raised by the blade of a young herb starting from the sod. He stood, listening and looking, now at the damp moss-covered ground, now at the watchful Laska, now at the bare tree-tops of the forest, which swept like a sea to the foot of the hill, and now at the darkening sky, where floated little white bits of cloud. A hawk flew aloft, slowly flapping his broad wings above the distant forest. Another took the same direction and disappeared. In the thicket the birds were chirping louder and more gaily than ever. Not far away, an owl lifted his voice, and Laska pricked up her ears again, took 2 or 3 cautious steps, and bent her head to listen. On the other side of the stream a cuckoo sang. Twice it uttered its customary cry, and then its voice grew hoarse. It flew away and was heard no more. "Why, the cuckoo has come," said Stepan Arkadyevitch, coming out from behind his thicket. "Yes, I hear," said Levin, disgusted that the silence of the forest was broken by the sound even of his own voice. "You won't have to wait long now." Stepan Arkadyevitch returned to his place behind his thicket, and Levin saw only the flash of a match and the red glow of his cigarette and a light bluish smoke. Chick, chick. Stepan Arkadyevitch cocked his gun. "What was that making that noise?" he asked of his companion, attracting his attention to a protracted humming, as if a colt was neighing with a very slender voice. "Don't you know what that is? That is the buck-rabbit. Don't speak any more. Listen, there is a bird," cried Levin, cocking his gun. A slender, distinct whistle was heard, with that rhythmic regularity which the huntsman knows so well. Then, a moment or two later, it was repeated, nearer, and suddenly changed into a hoarse little cry. Levin turned his eyes to the right, to the left, and finally saw just above his head, against the fading blue of the sky, above the gently waving aspens, a bird flying. It flew straight toward him. Its cry, like the noise made by tearing stiff cloth, rang in his ears. Then he distinguished the long bill and the long neck of the bird, but hardly had he caught sight of it when a red flash shone out from behind Oblonsky's bush. The bird darted off like an arrow and rose into the air again, but again the light flashed and a report was heard, and the bird, vainly striving to rise, flapped its wings for a second and fell heavily to the wet earth. "Did I miss?" asked Stepan Arkadyevitch, who could see nothing through the smoke. "Here she is!" cried Levin, pointing to Laska, who, with one ear erect and waving the tip end of her hairy tail, slowly, as if to lengthen out the pleasure, came back with the bird in her mouth, seeming almost to smile as she laid the game down at her master's feet. "Well now, I am glad you succeeded," said Levin, though he felt a slight sensation of envy, because he himself had not killed this snipe. "The right barrel missed, curse it!" replied Stepan Arkadyevitch, reloading his gun. "Shh! Here's another." In fact, the whistles came thicker and thicker, rapid and sharp. 2 snipe flew over the hunters, playing, chasing each other, and only whistling, not clucking. 4 shots rang out, and the snipe, making a sudden turn like swallows, disappeared from sight. The sport was excellent. Stepan Arkadyevitch killed 2 others, and Levin also 2, one of which was lost. It grew darker and darker. Venus, with silvery light, shone out low in the west from behind the birches, and high in the east Arcturus gleamed with his sombre reddish fire. Above his head Levin found and lost the stars of the Great Bear. The snipe had now ceased to fly, but Levin resolved to wait until Venus, which was visible above the birch trees, should stand clear above the lower branches, and till all the stars of the Great Bear should be entirely visible. The star had passed beyond the birch trees, and the wane of the Great Bear with its pole was shining out clear in the dark blue sky, and he was still waiting. "Isn't it getting late?" asked Stepan Arkadyevitch. All was calm in the forest, not a bird moved. "Let us wait a little longer," replied Levin. "Just as you please." At this moment they were not 15 paces apart. "Stiva," cried Levin suddenly, "you have not told me whether your sister-in-law is married yet, or whether she is to be married soon." He felt so calm, his mind was so thoroughly made up, that nothing, he thought, could move him. But what Stepan Arkadyevitch answered was wholly unexpected. "She is not married, and she is not thinking of marriage. She is very ill, and the doctors have sent her abroad. They even fear for her life." "What did you say?" cried Levin. "Very ill? What is the matter? How did she—" While they were talking thus, Laska, with ears erect, was gazing at the sky above her head, and looking at them reproachfully. "This is not the time to talk," thought Laska. "Ah, here comes one. There he goes. They will miss him." At the same instant a sharp whistle pierced the ears of the 2 huntsmen, and both, leveling their guns, shot at once. The 2 reports, the 2 flashes, were simultaneous. The snipe, flying high, folded his wings, drew up his delicate legs, and fell into the thicket. "Excellent! Both together!" cried Levin, running with Laska in search of the game. "Oh, yes! What was it that hurt me so much just now? Ah, yes, Kitty was ill," he remembered. "What is to be done about it? It is too bad. Ah, she has found it. Good dog!" said he, taking the bird, still warm, from Laska's mouth, and putting it into his overflowing game-bag. "Come on, Stiva!" he cried. On their way home, Levin questioned his friend about Kitty's illness and the plans of the Shtcherbatskys. Though it caused some conscientious scruples, what he heard was pleasant news to him. It was pleasant because it left him with some grounds for hope, and it was still more pleasant to think that she who had caused him so much suffering was suffering herself. But when Stepan Arkadyevitch began to speak of the reason of Kitty's illness, and pronounced the name of Vronsky, he interrupted him. "I have no right to know these family matters, since I am not concerned." Stepan Arkadyevitch smiled imperceptibly as he noticed the sudden and characteristic change in Levin, who, in an instant had passed from gaiety to sadness. "Have you succeeded in your transaction with Rabinin about the wood?" he asked. "Yes, I have made the bargain. He gives me an excellent price, 38,000 roubles, 8 in advance and the rest in 6 years. I had been long about it, and no one offered me any more." "That means you are selling your wood for a song," said Levin, frowning. "Why so?" said Stepan Arkadyevitch, with a good-humored smile, knowing that now Levin would totally disapprove of everything. "Because your wood is worth at least 500 roubles a desyatin." "Oh, you rural economists!" replied Stepan Arkadyevitch banteringly. "What a tone of scorn to us, your city brother! And yet, when it comes to business matters, we come out of it better than you do. Believe me, I have made a careful calculation. The wood is sold under very favorable circumstances, and I fear only one thing, and that is lest the merchant will back out of it. You see, it is wretched wood," he went on, accenting the word wretched, as if to convince Levin of the unfairness of his criticism, "and nothing but firewood. There will not be much more than 30 cords to the acre, and he pays me at the rate of 200 roubles." Levin smiled scornfully. "I know these city people," he thought, "who coming twice in 10 years into the country, and learning 2 or 3 country words, which they use appropriately or inappropriately, are firmly persuaded that they know it all. Wretched! Only 30 cords. He speaks words without knowing what he is talking about." "I do not pretend to teach you what you write in your office," said he, "and, If I needed, I would even ask your advice. But you are so sure that you understand this whole document about the wood. It is hard. Have you counted the trees?" "What, count my trees?" asked Stepan Arkadyevitch, with a laugh, and still trying to get his friend out of his ill humor. "Count the sands, the ray of the planets. Though lofty genius might. Well now, I tell you the lofty genius of Rabinin may. Never does a merchant purchase without counting, unless, indeed, the wood is given away for nothing, as you have done. I know your forest. I go hunting there every year, and your forest is worth 500 rubles a desyatin cash down, and he has given you only 200 and on a long term. That means you make him a present of 30,000. "Well, enough of imaginary receipts," said Stepan Arkadyevitch plaintively. "Why didn't someone offer me this price?" "Because the merchants connive together. I've had to do with all of them. I know them. They are not merchants, but speculators. None of them is satisfied with a profit less than 10 or 15%. They wait till they can buy for 20 kopecks what is worth a ruble." "Well enough. You are out of sorts." "Not at all," said Levin sadly, as they were approaching the house. A small cart, tightly bound with iron and leather, drawn by a fat horse, tightly harnessed with wide straps, was standing at the entrance. In the cart sat a red-faced overseer tightly belted, who served Rabinin as a coachman. Rabinin himself was already in the house, and met the two friends in the vestibule. Rabinin was a man of middle age, tall and thin, wearing a mustache, but his prominent chin was well shaven. His eyes were protuberant and muddy. He was clad in a dark blue coat with buttons set low behind, and he wore high boots, wrinkled around the ankles and smooth over the calves, and over his boots huge galoshes. Wiping his face with his handkerchief and wrapping his overcoat closely around him, though without that it fitted him well enough, he came out with a smile to meet the gentlemen as they entered. He gave one hand to Stepan Arkadyevitch as if he wanted to grasp something. "Ah, here you are," said Stepan Arkadyevitch, shaking hands. "Very good. I should not have ventured to disobey your Excellency's orders, though the roads are very bad. Positively, I came all the way on foot, but I got here on time. A greeting to you, Konstantin Dmitrich," said he, turning to Levin, intending to seize his hand also, but Levin, frowning, affected not to notice the motion, and began to take out the snipe. "You have been enjoying a hunt? What kind of a bird is that?" asked Rabinin, looking at the snipe disdainfully. "I suppose it has a peculiar flavor," and he shook his head disapprovingly, as if he felt doubtful whether the game were worth the candle. "Would you like to go to the library?" said Levin, darkly scowling, addressing Stepan Arkadyevitch in French. "Go to the library and discuss your business there." "Just as you please," replied the merchant, in a tone of disdainful superiority, apparently wishing it to be understood that others might find difficulties in transacting business, but that he never could. As he entered the library, Rabinin glanced about as if his eyes were in search of the holy image, but when he caught sight of it, he did not cross himself. He glanced at the bookcases and the shelves lined with books, and with the same air of doubt that the snipe had caused, he smiled scornfully and shook his head disapprovingly, as if this kind of game also were not worth the candle. "Well, did you bring the money?" asked Stepan Arkadyevitch. "Sit down." "The money will come all in good time. But I came to see you and have a talk." "What have we to talk about? However, sit down." "May as well sit down," said Rabinin, taking a chair, and leaning back in it in the most uncomfortable attitude. "You must give a trifle, Prince. It would be sinful not to do it. As to the money, it is all ready, absolutely and finally even to the last kopeck. As far as the money goes, there will be no delay." Levin, who had been putting his gun away in the armory and was just leaving the room, stopped as he heard the last words. "You bought that wood for a song," said he. "He came to visit me too late. I would have had a good price for it." Rabinin arose and smilingly contemplated Levin from head to foot, but said nothing. "Konstantin Levin is very sharp," said he at length, turning to Stepan Arkadyevitch. "One never succeeds in arranging a bargain finally with him. I have bought wheat and paid good prices. Why should I give you my property for a song? I did not find it in the ground, nor did I steal it." Excuse me, at the present day it is absolutely impossible to be a thief. Everything is done, in the present day, honestly and openly. Who could steal, then? We have spoken honestly and honourably. The wood is too dear. I shall not make the two ends meet. I beg him to yield a little." "But is your bargain made, or is it not? If it is made, there is no need of haggling. If it is not," said Levin, "I am going to buy the wood." The smile suddenly disappeared from Rabinin's lips. A rapacious and cruel expression, like that of a bird of prey, came in its place. With his bony fingers he tore open his overcoat, bringing into sight his shirt, his waistcoat with its copper buttons, and his watch chain, and from his breast pocket he pulled out a huge well-worn wallet. "Excuse me, the wood is mine!" he exclaimed, making a rapid sign of the cross, and he extended his hand. "Take your money, the wood is mine. This is how Rabinin ends his transactions. He does not reckon his kopecks," said he, knitting his brows and waving his wallet eagerly. "If I were in your place, I should not be in haste," said Levin. "Mercy on me!" said Oblonsky, astonished. "I have given my word." Levin dashed out of the room, slamming the door. Rabinin glanced at the door and shook his head. "Merely the effect of youth. Definitely. Pure childishness. Believe me, I buy this, so to speak, for the sake of glory, so that they may say, 'It's Rabinin, and not someone else, who has bought Oblonsky's forest.' And God knows how I shall come out of it. Have faith in God. Please sign." An hour later the merchant, carefully wrapping his khalat around him, and buttoning up his overcoat, took his seat in his cart and drove home, with the agreement in his pocket. "Oh, these gentlemen," he said to the overseer, "always the same story." "So it is," replied the prikazchik, giving up the reins so as to arrange the leather boot. "And your little purchase, Mikhail Ignatiitch?" "Well, well." Stepan Arkadyevitch went upstairs, his pockets bulging out with promises to pay due in 3 months, which the merchant had given him. The sale of the forest was concluded. He had money in his pocket. Sport had been good, and Stepan Arkadyevitch was in the happiest frame of mind, and therefore was especially eager to dispel the sadness which had taken possession of Levin. He wanted a good ending for the day that since dinner had shown such promise. In point of fact, Levin was not in good spirits, and in spite of his desire to seem amiable and thoughtful toward his beloved guest, he could not control himself. The intoxication which he felt in learning that Kitty was not married had begun little by little to affect him. Kitty not married, and ill from love for a man who had jilted her. It was almost like a personal insult. Vronsky had slighted her, and she had slighted him. Levin, consequently, had gained the right to despise him. He was therefore his enemy. Levin did not reason this all out. He had a vague sense that there was something in this humiliating to him, and he was angry now because it had upset his plans, and so everything which came up annoyed him. The stupid sale of the forest, which had taken place under his roof, and the way Oblonsky had been cheated, exasperated him. "Well, is it finished?" he asked, as he met Stepan Arkadyevitch upstairs. "Would you like some supper?" "Yes, I won't refuse. What an appetite I feel in the country! It's wonderful. Why didn't you offer a bite to Rabinin?" The devil take him." "Why, how you treated him!" exclaimed Oblonsky. "You didn't even offer him your hand. Why didn't you offer him your hand?" "Because I don't shake hands with my lackey, and my lackey is worth 100 of him." "What a retrograde you are! And how about the fusion of classes?" said Oblonsky. "Let those who like it enjoy it. It is disgusting to me." "You, I see, are a retrograde." "To tell the truth, I never asked myself what I am. I am Konstantin Levin, nothing more." "And Konstantin Levin is in a very bad humor," said Stepan Arkadyevitch, smiling. "Yes, I am in a bad humor. And do you know why? Because of your stupid barg—" Stepan Arkadyevitch frowned good-naturedly, like a man who is unreasonably scolded and blamed. "There, that'll do," he said. After any one has sold anything, they come saying, you might have sold this at a higher price, but no one thinks of offering this fine price before the sale. No, I see you have a grudge against this unfortunate Rabinin." "Maybe I have. And do you know why? You will call me a retrograde, or some worse name, but it is so vexatious and disgusting to me to see what is going on everywhere. The nobility which I belong to, and in spite of your fusion of classes, am very glad to belong to, is always getting poorer and poorer. And this growing poverty is not in consequence of luxurious living. That would be nothing. To live like lords is proper for the nobles. The nobles only can do this. Now the muzhiks are buying up our lands. That does not trouble me. The proprietor does nothing. The muzhik is industrious and supplants the lazy man. So it ought to be. And I am very glad for the muzhik. But what vexes me, and stirs my soul, is to see the proprietor robbed by, I don't know how to express it, by his own innocence. Here is a Polish leaseholder who has bought, at half price, a superb estate of a lady who lives at Nice. Yonder is a merchant who has hired a farm for 1 ruble an acre, and it is worth 10 rubles an acre. And this very day, without the slightest reason, you have given this rascal a present of 30,000. But what can I do? Count my trees one by one? Certainly. If you have not counted them, Rabinin did, and his children will have the means whereby to live and get an education, whereas yours, perhaps, will not. Well, forgive me, but there is something pitiful in such minute calculations. We have our ways of doing things, and they have theirs, and let them get the profits. There now. Moreover, it is done, and that's the end of it. And here is my favorite omelette coming in, and then Agafya Mikhailovna will certainly give us a glass of her marvelous herb beer." Stepan Arkadyevitch sat down at the table and began to joke with Agafya Mikhailovna, assuring her that he had not eaten such a dinner and such a supper for an age. "You can give fine speeches, at least," said Agafya Mikhailovna. But Konstantin Dmitrievitch, whatever was set before him, if only a crust of bread, would eat it and go away. Levin, in spite of his efforts to control himself, was melancholy and gloomy. He wanted to ask Stepan Arkadyevitch one question, but he could not make up his mind, nor could he find either the opportunity in which to ask it or a suitable form in which to couch it. Stepan Arkadyevitch had gone down to his room, and, after another bath, had put on a ruffled nightshirt and gone to bed. Levin still dallied in his room, talking about various trifles, but not having the courage to ask what he had at heart. "How wonderfully well this is made," he said, taking from its wrapper a piece of perfumed soap, which Agafya Mikhailovna had prepared for the guest, but which Oblonsky had not used. "Just look. Isn't it truly a work of art?" "Yes, all sorts of improvements nowadays," said Stepan Arkadyevitch, with a beatific yawn. "The theatres, for example, and yawning again, these amusing and electric lights everywhere. "Yes, the electric lights," repeated Levin. "And that Vronsky, where is he now?" he suddenly asked, putting down the soap. "Vronsky?" said Stepan Arkadyevitch, ceasing to yawn. "He is at Petersburg. He went away shortly after you did, and has not been in Moscow since. And do you know, Kostya," he continued, leaning his elbow on a little table placed near the head of the bed, and resting his handsome ruddy face on his hand, while 2 oily, good-natured and sleepy eyes shone out like twin stars, "I'm going to tell you the truth. You yourself were to blame. You were afraid of a rival, and I will remind you of what I said. I don't know which of you had the best chances. Why didn't you go ahead? I told you then that—" He yawned again, with his jaws only, trying not to open his mouth. "Does he or doesn't he know that I offered myself?" thought Levin, looking at him. Yes, there is something subtle, something diplomatic, in his face. And feeling that he was flushing, he said nothing, but looked straight into Oblonsky's eyes. "If on her part there was any feeling for him, it was merely a slight drawing," continued Oblonsky. "You know, that absolutely high breeding of his and the chances of position in the world had an effect on her mother, but not on her." Levin frowned. The humiliation of his rejection, with which he was suffering as from a recent wound, smarted in his heart. Fortunately he was at home, and the very walls of the home sustain one. "Wait, he interrupted. "You said high breeding. But let me ask you, what means this high breeding of Vronsky, or any one else? A high breeding that could look down on me? You consider Vronsky an aristocrat. I don't. A man whose father sprang from nothing by means of intrigue, whose mother has had liaisons with God knows whom. Oh, no, excuse me. Aristocrats, in my opinion, are men like myself, who can show in the past 3 or 4 generations of excellent families belonging to the most cultivated classes, talents and intellect are another matter, who never abased themselves before anybody and were never dependent on others, like my father and grandfather. And I know many such. It seems small business to you that I count my trees, while you give 30,000 rubles to Rabinin. But you receive a salary and other things, and I receive nothing of the sort, and therefore I appreciate what my father left me, and what my labor gives me. We are the aristocrats, and not those who live only by means of what the powers of this world dole out to them, who can be bought for a copper." "There, whom are you so angry with? I agree with you," replied Stepan Arkadyevitch, sincerely and gaily, though he knew that when Levin hurled his sarcasms at those who could be bought for a copper, he meant him. But Levin's animation really pleased him. "Whom are you angry with? Though much of what you say about Vronsky is not true, still I won't speak about that. I will tell you frankly that if I were in your place, I would start for Moscow and—" "No! I don't know whether you know or not, but it's over for me. I will tell you. I proposed and was rejected, so that now the memory of Katerina Alexandrovna is painful and humiliating." "Why so? What nonsense! But let us not speak of it. Forgive me if I have been rude to you," said Levin. Now that he had made a clean breast of it, he began once more to feel as he had felt in the morning. "You will not be angry with me, Stiva? I beg of you, don't be angry with me," said he, with a smile, and he took his hand. "Of course not. I will not think anything more about it. I am very glad, though, that we have spoken frankly to each other. And, do you know, sport will be capital tomorrow. We can try it again, can't we? In that case I would not even sleep, but go straight from the grove to the station." "Capital." Although Vronsky's inner life was wholly absorbed by his passion, his outward life unchangeably and inevitably ran along in the former ordinary rails of his social and regimental ties and interests. His regiment filled an important part in his life. In the first place because he loved his regiment, and, still more, because he was extremely popular in it. In his regiment he was not only admired, but he was also respected. They were proud of him, proud that a man enormously rich, with a fine education and with qualities, with a path open before him to every kind of success and ambition and glorification, scorned all that, and placed the interests of his regiment and his comrades above all the interests of life. Vronsky recognized the feeling which he inspired, and, besides the fact that he loved that life, he felt called on, in a certain degree, to sustain his character. Of course he spoke to no one of his passion. Never did an imprudent word escape him, even when he joined his comrades in the liveliest of drinking bouts. However, he was never so intoxicated as to lose control over himself. And he kept his mouth shut in the presence of those gossiping meddlers who made the least allusion to the affairs of his heart. Nevertheless, his passion was a matter of notoriety throughout the city. All had more or less well-founded suspicions of his relationship to Madame Karenina, and most of the young men envied him on account of the very thing that was the greatest drawback to his love, Karenin's high station, which made the matter more conspicuous. The majority of young women, jealous of Anna, whom they were weary of hearing always called the just, were not sorry to have their predictions verified, and were waiting only for the sanction of public opinion to overwhelm her with the whole weight of their scorn. They had already prepared for use the mud which should be thrown at her when the time should come. Most people of experience, and those of high rank, were displeased at the prospect of a disgraceful scandal in society. Vronsky's mother, when she heard of the liaison, at first was glad, because, in her opinion, nothing gave the last finish to a brilliant young man compared to an intrigue in high life, and because she was not sorry to find that Madame Karenin, who had pleased her so much, and who seemed so entirely devoted to her boy, was, after all, only like any other handsome and elegant woman. But later she learned that her son had refused an important promotion, for no other reason than that he might stay with his regiment and keep on visiting Madame Karenin. And she learned that, on account of this, persons very high in authority were dissatisfied with him, and she changed her opinion in regard to it. There was another reason why she did not now approve of it. For all she could learn of this liaison, it was not the brilliant and fashionable flirtation, such as she approved, but a desperate tragedy, after the style of Werther, according to report, and she was afraid lest her son should be drawn into some folly. Since his unexpected departure from Moscow she had not seen him, but she sent word to him, through his elder brother, that she desired him to come to her. His elder brother was even more dissatisfied, not because he felt anxious to know whether this love affair was to be deep or ephemeral, passionate or platonic, innocent or guilty. He himself, though a married man and the father of a family, had a ballet dancer for a mistress, and therefore had no right to be severe, but because he knew that this love affair was displeasing in quarters where it was better to be on good terms, and therefore he blamed his brother's conduct. Vronsky, besides his society relations and his military duties, had yet another absorbing passion: horses. The officers' handicap races were to take place this summer. He became a subscriber and bought a pure-blood English trotter, and in spite of his love affair, he was passionately though discreetly interested in the results of the races. These two passions did not interfere with each other. On the contrary, he needed something independent of his love affair, some occupation and interest in which he could find refreshment and recreation after the over-violent emotions which stirred him. On the day of the Krasno-Silo races, Vronsky came earlier than usual to eat a beefsteak in the officers' common dining hall. He was not at all constrained to limit himself, since his weight satisfied the 160 pounds required, but he did not want to get fat, and so he refrained from sweet and farinaceous foods. He sat down with his coat unbuttoned over his white waistcoat, and with both elbows resting on the table. While he was waiting for his beefsteak he kept his eyes on the pages of a French novel which lay on the plate. He looked at his book only so as not to talk with the officers as they went and came, but he was thinking. He was thinking how Anna had promised to meet him after the races, but he had not seen her for 3 days, and he was wondering if she would be able to keep her appointment, as her husband had just returned to Petersburg from a journey abroad. And he was wondering how he could find out. They had met for the last time at his cousin Betsy's dacha, or country house, for he went to the Karenins' dacha as little as possible, and now he wanted to go there, and he was asking himself, how can it be managed? Of course I will say that I am charged by Betsy to find whether she expects to attend the races. Yes, certainly, I will go, he said, raising his head from his book, and his face shone with the joy caused by his imagination at the forthcoming interview. Send word that I wish my carriage and troika harnessed and brought round, said he to the waiter who was bringing his beefsteak on a hot silver platter. Moving the platter toward him, he began his meal. In the adjoining billiard room the clinking of balls was heard, and 2 voices talking and laughing. 2 officers appeared in the door. One of them was a young man with delicate, refined features, who had just graduated from the Corps of Pages and joined the regiment. The other was old and fat, with little, moist eyes, and wore a bracelet on his wrist. Vronsky glanced at them and frowned, and went on eating and reading at the same time, as if he had not seen them. "Getting ready for work, are you?" asked the fat officer, sitting down near him. "You see I am," replied Vronsky, wiping his lips, and frowning again without looking up. "But aren't you afraid of getting fat?" continued the elderly officer, pulling up a chair for his junior. "What?" cried Vronsky, making a grimace to express his disgust and aversion, and showing his splendid teeth. "Aren't you afraid of getting fat?" "Waiter, sherry!" cried Vronsky, without replying, and he changed his book to the other side of his plate, and continued to read. The fat officer took the wine list and passed it over to the young officer. "You select what we'll have to drink," said he, giving him the list and looking at him. "Rhine wine, if you please," replied the young officer, looking timidly at Vronsky out of the corner of his eye and trying to twist his imaginary mustache. When he saw that Vronsky did not turn, the young officer got up and said, "Let us go into the billiard room." The fat officer humbly arose, and the two went out of the door. At the same time a tall, stately cavalry captain named Yashvin came in. He condescendingly and disdainfully nodded to the two officers, and went toward Vronsky. "Ah, here he is!" he cried, laying his heavy hand on Vronsky's shoulder. Vronsky turned round angrily, but in an instant a pleasant, friendly expression came into his face. "Well, Alyosha," said the cavalry captain, in his big baritone, "have something more to eat, and drink one more glass with me." "No, I don't want any more to eat." "Those are inseparables," said Yashvin, looking derisively at the two officers as they disappeared. And then he sat down, doubling up under the chair, which was too short for him, his long legs dressed in tight uniform trousers. "Weren't you at the Krosmensky Theatre last evening? Numerovna was not bad at all. Where were you?" "I stayed too late at the Tverskoyas'," said Vronsky. "Ah!" exclaimed Yashvin. Yashvin, a gambler, a debauch, was Vronsky's best friend in the regiment. It could not be said of him that he lacked principles. He had principles, but they were immoral ones. Vronsky liked him, both for his exceptional physical vigor, which allowed him to drink like a hogshead and not feel it, and to do absolutely without sleep if it were necessary, and also for his great social ability, which he employed in his relations to his superiors and his comrades, attracting to himself their love and respect, and also in gambling, at which he risked tens of thousands, and always, no matter how much he had been drinking, played so cleverly and daringly that he was regarded as the leading gambler at the English Club. Vronsky felt friendship and consideration for him, because he felt that Yashvin liked him, not for his fortune or his social position, but chiefly on his own account. Moreover, Yashvin was the only man to whom Vronsky would have been willing to speak of his love. He felt that, in spite of his affected scorn for all kinds of sentiment, he alone could appreciate the serious passion which now absorbed his whole life. Besides, he was persuaded that he found absolutely no pleasure in tittle-tattle and scandal, but considered this feeling as essential, in other words, that he knew and believed that love was no joke, no mere pastime, but something serious and important. Thus, taken all in all, his presence was always agreeable to him. Vronsky had not yet spoken to him about his love, but he knew that Yashvin knew it, looked on it in its true light, and it was a pleasure to read this in his eyes. "Ah, yes," said the cavalry captain, when he heard the name of the Tverskoyas, and, flashing his brilliant black eyes at him, he seized his left mustache and began to cram it into his mouth, for this was a bad habit of his. "And what did you do last evening? Did you gain?" asked Vronsky. 8,000 rubles, but 3,000 possibly are no good. I may not get them." "Well, then you may lose on me," said Vronsky, laughing. Yashvin had laid a large wager on him. "But I shall not lose. Makhotyn is the only one to be afraid of." And the conversation went off in regard to the races, which was the only subject of which Vronsky could now think. "Come on, I have done," said Vronsky, getting up and going to the door. Yashvin also arose and stretched his huge legs and long back. "I can't dine so early, but I will take something to drink. I will follow you immediately. Here, wine!" he cried in his heavy voice, which was the wonder of the regiment. It made the windows rattle. "No, no matter," he cried again. "If you are going home, I'll join you." And he went off with Vronsky. Vronsky was lodging in a neat and spacious Finnish izba, divided in two by a partition. Petritsky was his chum, not only in Petersburg, but here also in camp. He was asleep when Vronsky and Yashvin entered. "Get up! You've slept long enough," said Yashvin, going behind the partition and shaking the sleeper's shoulder as he lay with his nose buried in the pillow. Petritsky suddenly got up on his knees and looked all about him. "Your brother has been here," said he to Vronsky. "He woke me up, the devil take him, and he said that he would come again." Then he threw himself back on the pillow again and pulled up the bedclothes. "Stop, Yashvin!" he cried angrily as his comrade twitched off his quilt. Then he turned over, opened his eyes, and said, "You would do much better to tell me what I ought to drink to take this bad taste out of my mouth." "Vodka is better than anything," said Yashvin. "Terestchenko, bring the baron some vodka and cucumbers," he cried, delighting in the thunder of his voice. "You advise vodka? Ha!" exclaimed Petritsky, scowling and rubbing his eyes. "Will you take some too? If you'll join, all right. Vronsky, will you have a drink?" said Petritsky, getting up and wrapping a striped quilt about him under his arms. He came to the door of the partition, raised his arms in the air, and began to sing in French. "There was a king in Thou-u-Li. Vronsky, will you have a drink?" "Go away," replied the latter, who was putting on an overcoat brought him by his valet. "Where are you going?" asked Yashvin, seeing a carriage drawn by 3 horses. "Here's the troika." "To the stables, then to Bryansky's to see about some horses," replied Vronsky. Vronsky had, indeed, promised to bring some money to Bryansky, who lived about 10 versts from Peterhof, and he was in a hurry to get there as soon as possible, so as to pay for the horses, but his friends immediately understood that he was also going somewhere else. Petritsky, who kept on singing, winked, and pursed his lips as if he would say, "We know who this Bryansky means." "See here, don't be late," said Yashvin, and changing the subject. "And my roan, does she suit you?" he asked, looking out of the window and referring to the middle horse of the team which he had sold. Just as Vronsky left the room, Petritsky called out to him, "Hold on, your brother left a note and a letter. Hold on, where did I put them?" Vronsky waited impatiently. "Well, where are they? Where are they indeed? That's the question," declaimed Petritsky, solemnly, putting his forefinger above his nose. "Speak quick, no nonsense," said Vronsky, smiling. "I have not had any fire in the fireplace. Where can I have put them?" "Come now, enough talk. Where's the letter?" "I swear I have forgotten. Or did I dream about it? Wait, don't get angry. If you had drunk 4 bottles, as I did yesterday, you wouldn't even know where you went to bed. Hold on, I'll think in a minute." Petritsky went behind the screen again and got into bed. "Hold on, I was lying here. He stood there. Da, 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 da. Here it is!" And he pulled the letter out from under the mattress where he had put it. Vronsky took the letter and his brother's note. It was exactly as he expected. His mother reproached him because he had not been to see her, and his brother said he had something to speak to him about. "What concern is it of theirs?" he muttered, and crumpling up the notes, he thrust them between his coat buttons, intending to read them more carefully on the way. Just as he left the izba, he met 2 officers, one of whom belonged to a different regiment. Vronsky's quarters were always the headquarters of all the officers. "Whither away?" "Must, to Peterhof." "Has your horse come from Tsarskoye?" "Yes, but I have not seen her yet." "They say Makotin's gladiator is lame." "Rubbish! How can you trot in such mud?" "Here are my saviors!" cried Petritsky, as he saw the newcomers. The denshchik was standing before him with vodka and salted cucumbers on a platter. "Yashvin here ordered me to drink, so as to clear my head." "Well, you were too much for us last night," said one of the officers. "You did not let us sleep all night." "I must tell you how we ended it," began Petritsky. "Volkov climbed up on the roof and told us that he was blue. I sung out, 'Give us some music, a funeral march,' and he went to sleep on the roof to the music of the funeral march." Drink your vodka by all means, and then take seltzer and a lot of lemon," said Yashvin, encouraging Petritsky as a mother encourages her child to swallow some medicine. "It is only a little bottle." "Now, this is sense. Hold on, Vronsky, and have a drink with us." No, good-bye, gentlemen, I am not drinking to-day." "Vronsky!" cried someone after he had gone into the vestibule. "What?" "You had better cut off your hair. It's getting very long, especially on the bald spot." Vronsky, in fact, was beginning to get a little bald. He laughed gaily, showing his splendid teeth, and, pulling his cap over the bald spot, he went out and got into his carriage. "To the stables," he said. He started to take his letters for a second reading, but on second thought deferred them so that he might think of nothing else but his horse. "I'll wait." A temporary stable, a balagan or hut, made out of planks had been built near the racecourse, and here Vronsky's horse should have been brought the evening before. He had not as yet seen her. During the last few days he himself had not been out to drive, but he had entrusted her to the trainer, and Vronsky did not know in what condition he should find her. He was just getting out of his carriage when his conductor, or groom, a young fellow, saw him from the distance and immediately called the trainer. This was an Englishman with a withered face and tufted chin, and dressed in short jacket and top boots. He came out toward Vronsky in the mincing steps peculiar to jockeys, and with elbows sticking out. "Well, how is Frau?" said Vronsky in English. "All right, sir," said the Englishman in a voice that came out of the bottom of his throat. "Better not go in, sir," he added, taking off his hat. "I've put a muzzle on her, and that excites her. Better not go in, it excites a horse." "No, I'm going in. I want to see her." "Come on, then," replied the Englishman testily, and, without ever opening his mouth, and with his dandified step, he led the way. They went into a small yard in front of the stable. An active and alert stable-boy in a clean jacket, with whip in hand, met them as they entered and followed them. 5 horses were in the stable, each in its own stall. Vronsky knew that his most redoubtable rival, Makotin's Gladiator, a chestnut horse 5 vershaks high, was there, and he was more curious to see Gladiator than to see his own racer, but he knew that, according to the etiquette of the races, he could not have him brought out or even ask questions about him. As he passed along the corridor, the groom opened the door of the second stall at the left, and Vronsky saw a powerful chestnut with white feet. He knew it was Gladiator, but with the delicacy of a man who turns away from an open letter which is not addressed to him, he instantly turned away and walked toward Frau's stall. "That horse belongs to Mac. I never can pronounce his name," said the Englishman over his shoulder and pointing to Gladiator's stall with a huge finger, the nail of which was black with dirt. "Makotin's? Yes, he is my only dangerous rival." "If you would mount him, I would bet on you," said the Englishman. Frau has more nerve. This one's stronger," said Vronsky, smiling at the jockey's praise. "In hurdle races it all depends on the mount, and on pluck." Pluck, that is, audacity and coolness, Vronsky knew that he had in abundance, and, what was far more important, he was firmly convinced that no one could have more of this pluck than he had. "You are sure that a good sweating was not necessary?" "Not at all," replied the Englishman. "Please not speak so loud, the horse is restive," he added, jerking his head toward the closed stall in front of which they were standing. They could hear the horse stamping on the straw. He opened the door, and Vronsky entered a box stall feebly lighted by a little window. A dark bay horse, muzzled, was nervously prancing up and down on the fresh straw. As he gazed into the semi-obscurity of the stall, Vronsky, in spite of himself, took in at one general observation all the points of his favorite horse. Frau was a horse of medium size, and not faultless in form. Her bones were slender, although her brisket showed powerfully. Her breast was narrow, the crupper was rather tapering, and the legs, particularly the hind legs, considerably bowed. The muscles of the legs were not big, but, on the other hand, where the saddle rested the horse was extraordinarily wide, and this was particularly striking by reason of the firmness and the smallness of her belly. The bones of the legs below the knee seemed not thicker than a finger, seen from the front. They were extraordinarily large when seen sidewise. The whole steed, with the exception of the ribs, seemed squeezed in and lengthened out. But she had one merit that outweighed all her faults. She was a thoroughbred, had good blood, which tells, as the English say. Her muscles, standing out under a network of veins, covered with a skin as smooth and soft as satin, seemed as solid as bone. Her slender head, with prominent eyes, bright and animated, widened out at the septum into projecting nostrils with membrane which seemed suffused with blood. In her whole form, and especially in her head, there was an expression of something energetic and decided, and at the same time good-tempered. It was one of those creatures which do not speak for the single reason that the mechanical construction of their mouths does not permit it. Vronsky, at any rate, was convinced that she understood all his thoughts while he was looking at her. As soon as he went to her she began to take long breaths, and, turning her prominent eyes so that the whites became suffused with blood, she gazed from the opposite side at the visitors, trying to shake off her muzzle, and dancing on her feet with elastic motion. "You see how excited she is," said the Englishman. "Oh, my loveliest, oh," said Vronsky, approaching to soothe her. But the nearer he came the more nervous she grew, and only when he had caressed her head did she become tranquil. He could feel her muscles strain and tremble under her delicate, smooth skin. Vronsky smoothed her powerful neck, and put into place a tuft of her mane that she had tossed on the other side, and then he put his face close to her nostrils, which swelled and dilated like the wings of a bat. She drew in the air and loudly expelled it from her quivering nostrils, pricked up her sharp ears, and stretched out her long black lips to seize his sleeve, but, when she found herself prevented by her muzzle, she shook it and began to caper again on her slender legs. "Quiet, my beauty, quiet," said Vronsky, calming her, and he left the stable with the reassuring conviction that his horse was in perfect condition. But the nervousness of the steed had taken possession of Vronsky. He felt the blood rush to his heart, and, like the horse, he wanted violent action. He felt like prancing and biting. It was a sensation at once strange and joyful. "Well, I count on you," he said to the Englishman. "Be on the grounds at 6:30. "All shall be ready. But where are you going, my lord?" asked the Englishman, using the title of "my lord," which he almost never permitted himself to use. Astonished at this, Vronsky raised his head and looked at him as he well understood how to do, not into the Englishman's eyes, but at his forehead. He instantly saw that the Englishman had spoken to him, not as to his master, but as to a jockey, and he replied, "I've got to see Bryansky, and I shall be at home in an hour." "How many times have I been asked that question to-day?" he said to himself, and he grew red, which was a rare occurrence with him. The Englishman looked at him closely, and, as if he also knew where Vronsky was going, he said, "The main thing is to keep calm before the race. Don't get out of sorts. Don't get bothered." "All right," replied Vronsky with a smile, and jumping into his carriage he ordered the coachman to drive to Peterhof. He had gone but a short distance before the clouds, which since morning had been threatening rain, grew thicker, and a heavy shower fell. "Too bad," thought Vronsky, raising the hood of his carriage. "It has been muddy, now it will be a swamp." Now that he was sitting alone in his covered calash, he took out his mother's letter and his brother's note, and read them over. Yes, it was always the old story. Both his mother and his brother found it necessary to meddle again with his love affairs. This interference aroused his anger, a feeling which he rarely experienced. "How does this concern them? Why does everyone feel called on to meddle with me, and why do they bother me? Because they see that there is something about this that they can't understand. If it were an ordinary vulgar society intrigue, they would leave me in peace. But they imagine that it is something else, that it is not mere trifling, that this woman is dearer to me than life. It is incredible and vexatious to them. Whatever be our fate, we ourselves have made it, and we shall not regret it," he said to himself, including Anna in the word "we." "But no, they want to teach us how to live. They have no idea of what happiness is. They don't know that, if it were not for this love, there would be for us neither joy nor grief in this world. Life itself would not exist." In reality, what exasperated him most against everyone was the fact that his conscience told him that they, all of them, were right. He felt that his love for Anna was not a superficial impulse, destined, like so many social attachments, to disappear and leave no trace beyond sweet or painful memories. He felt keenly all the torture of her situation and his, and how difficult it was in the prominent position which they held in the eyes of society to hide their love, to lie, to deceive, to dissemble, and constantly to think about others, when that passion uniting them was so violent that they both forgot about everything else except their love. He vividly pictured to himself all the constantly recurring circumstances when it was essential to employ falsehood and deceit, which were so contrary to his nature. He recalled with especial vividness the feeling of shame which he had often surprised in Anna when she also was driven to tell a lie. Since this affair with her, he sometimes experienced a strange sensation. There was a feeling of disgust and repulsion for some one, he could not tell for whom he felt it, for Alexey Alexandrovitch or himself, or for all society. As far as possible he banished this strange feeling. Yes, heretofore she has been unhappy, but proud and calm. Now she cannot be proud and content any longer, though she may not betray the fact. Yes, this must end, he would conclude in his own mind. And, for the first time, the thought of cutting short this life of dissimulation appeared to him clear and tangible. The sooner, the better. She and I must leave everything, and together we must go and hide ourselves somewhere with our love, he said to himself.